What do you do? See, that's the kind of scenario you might encounter when playing Dungeons and Dragons. So, first things first, you're going to need a character for that, and with this, I hope to guide you through that process. First things first, though, you need to understand a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons. It's a weird mixture of an imagination game and a board game. You have these rules and like books holding these rules that kind of tell you how to play, but aside from that, it's just kind of like a sandbox for you to play in and do whatever you want. And the way it works is you'll have a group of adventurers on one side, typically like 5 people is the standard number, and then you'll have a dungeon master. And the group of adventurers, they pretty much just control their character. So you'll have whatever your dwarven fighter over here, and you control his emotions, his actions, or her actions, their feelings, things like that. And everything outside of that character is in the realm of the dungeon master over here. So you're going to need to make a character to interact in that and play with everyone. So getting down to it, you need to think about your character. And the neat thing about it is you can come at it from many different angles. You know, you can say, this person, he likes to use magic, or this person is a recluse, or this person is obsessed with money. So whatever your starting point is, you just kind of roll with that and develop that into an idea of a character. So when you're coming into character creation, it's good to have at least a preconceived notion of what you'd like to do. So in thinking about this, I'm, imagining, like I said, a dwarven fighter. His name's Baldwin. He's from the Hammershield clan, let's say, which, dwarven lineage goes way back. They're excellent blacksmiths or something. And he's kind of a drunk, something like that. Likes to get into bar fights. So we're just going to roll with making him as an example character. So what you do, I've already picked a race. It might help if you look through the player's handbook. Races start about on page 37 is where you would find a dwarf, and there are a few other ones around there. You'll also want to look around the classes and see which appeal to you, because one of the most important things is having a character that you identify with. Otherwise you won't be able to think like, oh, what would Baldwin be thinking in this situation, if you can't place yourself in their shoes, so to speak. And so you've picked a race, you've picked a class, dwarf, and fighter. And with them are, some things you need to start noting down. You'll want to grab your blank character sheet right here, and we can start figuring out some numbers. If you look at dwarves, you'll see that they get a racial bonus to Constitution and Wisdom. So you want to note that on your sheet next to the Con and Wiz. So you just put a little +2 by both of those. And if you look at fighters, you'll see they get a bonus to defenses in Fortitude. So you'll add that under the miscellaneous category on your character sheet. So now that you've got those written down, you can pick stats for your character. And it used to be back in before 4th edition pretty much, which is what we're doing right now. Before 4th edition, you would roll dice and kind of figure it out from there. But the way it works now is you have a standard array, which is a list of numbers. It's like 16, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10. And you assign those to different abilities. And the abilities you can choose from are Strength, Constitution, Dexterity, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. And each ability represents different things and has different ramifications in the game, and it also affects how your character is going to play. So if you're a fighter, they have 2 primary stats, which would be Strength and Constitution, which is alright for a dwarf. But if you're trying to power game, which is making the most powerful character you can, you're going to want to pick a race that gives bonuses to those primary abilities. But we'll just roll with this. So you're going to want to put your highest number in your primary stat, which is Strength. So I'll write a 16 in there. and the second highest number in your secondary stat, which is Constitution. So I'm going to put a 14 in Constitution, but there's that +2 racial bonus, so it's actually a 16. And then, here's a time when you can think about character development. You're always thinking about character development. Is Baldwin charismatic? Is he good with people? No. So I'm going to give him a 10. Is he wise? I mean, he's dwarven. He came up like that a little bit, so I'll put the 13 there. But that goes up to 15 with his racial bonus. And I'll tell you something about Baldwin. He's not the smartest, but he's not the dumbest. So we're going to put a 12 for intelligence. And he has thick dwarven fingers, but they move quickly. So we'll give him a 13 for dexterity. And now that you've got that, you can figure out your ability modifiers, which is, and this is a rule generally across D&D, you subtract 10, divide by 2, and round down. So your ability modifier for strength, which is 16 strength, subtract 10, you get 6, divide by 2 is 3. You don't even have to round down. So your ability modifier for that is 3, and you'll just put that in the box next to it. Constitution is the same. Dexterity, the modifier, would be a 1. Intelligence would be a 1. Wisdom would be a 2. And charisma would be a 0. And the way these modifiers work is they're applied to attacks you make, they're applied to skill checks you make, and so it affects what your character is good at. So Baldwin's going to be good at climbing things, breaking down doors, arm wrestling. He'll be good at holding his breath, things like that rely on strength and constitution. But he's not going to be very good at reading a magical spell book or something because his intelligence is so low. He's not that wise, and he'll definitely be terrible at trying to, lie to the city guard if he gets caught stealing something. So, on that note, we're going to fill in the skills, or at least the modifiers for your skills. And it's pretty easily listed. In the middle box, you just take your skill modifier that we just figured out, and you put it down there. So, for acrobatics, you write 1 for your modifier, and you just go down the line like that. So now we've kind of figured out these base statistics. Oh, they also apply to your defenses. So if you look just to the right of your ability scores, you'll see AC, which stands for armor class, Fort, which is fortitude, reflex, and will. And the first box there is 10 plus half your level, so that'd just be 10 because we're level 1, we're noobs. And then you add your ability modifier for the relevant skill. So, and it kind of has a little arrow pointing to it. I don't know. A little arrow right there pointing from your primary skill to that. So you take the higher of the two that are associated with that. So fortitude, they're both 3, so we'll just write that in there. But moving down to will, it relies on wisdom or charisma. And wisdom is higher, so we'll put that in there. And 10 plus level. And when you're figuring the rest of that out, you add in, so you've got your ability mod, your 10 plus half level, maybe a racial bonus, maybe a class bonus. So right now we're looking at 15 fortitude to check if you've done it right, which can change if you get items or armor or things like that, which comes up later. But we've got all that figured out. So now we're going to move on to training and skills. So if you look in the bottom left, those skills that we determine the modifier for, you can kind of pick what ones you're good at. And I like to think of my character's history, Baldwin grew up in a mine, deep in a mountain because he's a dwarf and dwarves love mountains. And so he knows a lot about dungeony things, caves. So I'm going to train him in that, dungeoneering, put an X next to the train. And the way that affects your skill is it gives you, your modifier increases by 5 whenever you make a roll with that. And as a fighter, you can pick 3 skills. So we'll say, he was working in the mine and people were getting hurt all the time, so he's also trained in healing, just de facto. And he pumps a lot of iron, so we're going to train him in athletics as well, which will be sweet, because he's not only strong, but trained in athletics. He'll be a superpower. So we figured that out. And next thing for character development is you start to pick your powers. And the way powers work is generally, some of them work outside of combat, but generally in a combat scenario, you're coming up to someone and you have certain powers. You have an at-will power. You have two of them, actually. You have one encounter power and one daily power. And at-wills are, like, you can use them whenever. Encounters you can only use once per encounter, and dailies are like your big guns. So you can only use those once per day. So we're going to flip through and pick out some good ones that you think would be neat. And in this scenario, it'll be a lot easier if you read through the book and kind of weigh it out. But I've already picked some out. And because Baldwin's a dwarf, dwarves love hammers, he's going to have a huge hammer, and he's going to use that for various attacks. So I'm going to pick attacks that focus more on damaging people as opposed to defensive attacks. So we'll just give him Cleave, which is a level 1 at will, and Sure Strike. Sure Strike is nice because you can definitely hit people with it. It makes it a little easier. And then we'll move on to encounter powers. I'm going to probably go with, what's my favorite? Covering Attack is neat because when you're working with people, it helps them move around, and you can move around and kind of weasel the bad guys right in between you, in the middle of a sandwich. So I'm going to pick Covering Attack for his encounter power, which will be nice. And for the daily power, I always like to pick Comeback Strike because it's a way to heal yourself while also doing damage, which is really important for a fighter. I mean, what are you going to do if you're lying on the ground? Nothing. Bleed to death, maybe. So that'll just help Baldwin stay alive if he gets into a hairy situation, which is always a situation because he's a dwarf and they have beards, generally, even the women. So we figured out all his powers. So we picked powers, we figured out attributes, we figured out skills, and we figured out defenses without armor. We'll get armor later. And so we're going to move on to the last step in character creation. Well, I mean, character creation is ever ongoing. The last step in concrete character creation, which is picking a feat. And feats are nice ways to just juice up your character a little bit in a certain direction. If you're like, oh, Baldwin's really cool, but he's missing a lot with his huge hammer, you could take a feat that is all about hammer specialization. Or if he's just getting totally beat up, you can be like, oh man, he needs better armor. I'll take a feat that lets him wear plate mail instead of scale mail, which is better armor. So I think, because Baldwin's all about, being tough, lasting, I'm going to go with armor proficiency plate, which means he'll be able to wear plate armor. So I'm going to go ahead and write that in the feats section, and we've got that figured out. So next thing to look at is equipment, which is, at level 1 it's not that exciting. You start out with 100 gold. So first things first, always buy an adventurer's kit. Second thing, you want to get the best armor you can that doesn't impede you too much, because heavier armor slows you down, as do shields. But Baldwin doesn't care about a shield. He's tough. He's a dwarf. So start off with 100 gold. You turn to the equipment section in the book, which is chapter 7, I do believe. And you just look over, there are some neat pictures of weapons, and you have to think, okay, what does my guy feel? Baldwin wants a big hammer, so I'm going to get a war hammer. And he is trained to use plate armor, so why not use plate armor? So he's going to have plate armor and a war hammer and an adventurer's kit, and maybe some healing potions and things like that. But now you're all set to do it, pretty much. You're ready to go hang out with your nerdy friends and have the time of your life, probably eat some pizza and just imagine and roll some dice. So what we went over today was conceptualizing your character, thinking about character traits and how that affects your playstyle. Not even your playstyle, but your character. And then using that to kind of get a more concrete idea of who your character is, and then flipping through the book and finding a race and class that kind of fits into that mold. And then we assigned attributes, we figured out defenses, we figured out trained skills and powers, and we bought equipment. So I think we're all ready to roll, and happy dungeoneering to you.